Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are back with the rapid portion of the creator clash between international masters Julien Song from France and international master Levy Rozman from the United States of America. Now, after the two classical games, the players remain tied in their match, and we now move into the rapid portion with 4 games of 15 minutes plus 10-second increment per move. So in the first game, we have Levy with the white pieces, and Levy opens with the move b3. We get d5, bishop b2, bishop f5, and now we get the move pawn to d3. Now, when I saw this opening being played in this first game, it made me chuckle a little bit because this, of course, is an opening that yours truly, Grandmaster Hikaru, has used many times from the white side. Now, if I'm being honest, I get the very weird sense that Levy, maybe on purpose or maybe for the memes, is trying to emulate my games. Maybe that'll make for better content when he does the recaps or something like that. But anyway, Levy, it seems like, is intentionally trying to follow my openings. Now we get the move e6 here from Julien Song. It's worth pointing out that if white plays this setup with b3 and d3 without putting the knight on f3, there is one very serious drawback, and that drawback is that black should play for the move c5, and if white plays knight d2, black can play knight c6 here, and after knight to f3, for example, and the move d4 followed by e5, black generally has a very pleasant position. But it is rapid if you don't know exactly what to do against the setup and you don't understand what Levy is going for, or frankly what I'm aiming for when I play this opening from the white side. It's very easy to play the standard setup with e6, h6, knight f6, and all the regular moves. But as we're about to see, this is a slightly dubious setup because it gives white an extra opportunity. So we get knight to d2. Now we get the move h6 being played by Julien Song, and now we have the move g3. We get knight to f6, and here Levy plays the move bishop g2. We get bishop to e7, and Levy plays the move e4. Now Julien retreats with the bishop to h7, and here we get the move knight to h3. Now, this is a big drawback to the setup that Julien has played, and this is why usually in the opening, if white has put the knight on f3, for example, say you get some position like this and knight f3, generally all these setups with h6, bishop h7, and bishop h7 are completely fine. And the biggest reason is that the knight on f3, generally in these positions, is very slightly misplaced. The knight doesn't have anything to target in the center of the board, except covering a couple of open squares. So, back to the game. When we get the move knight to h3, in this position, and we get d takes e4, if black were to play a move like c6, white has multiple options. You can play knight to f4, aiming to play something like e5 and something like knight to h5 with a quick attack on the king side here with queen g4. You can also potentially play something like f4 with the idea down the road of playing something like g4 and g5 very quickly, trying to open up the king side here with a lot of ideas like queen h5, rook f3, rook h3, and with the open diagonals here, white should be doing very well. So this is why I really think it's important to understand the system, and why, if white does not put the knight on f3 immediately, you want to be aware that white's idea is to go knight h3. So we get this position after castles, and Julien decides to play pawn takes pawn on e4. We get pawn takes pawn, the move knight c6, and now Levy plays this move e5. Now, it's abundantly clear to me that Levy is not doing serious preparation for this match. He's more or less looking at some little ideas right before the games, trying to make it work, because in this position, he already makes a bad move. Now, what Levy should have played here is the move knight to f4, and this move makes sense for a couple of different reasons. Let's say black were to play the move e5. Now white can go knight to d3, and this knight and bishop combine to hit this pawn in the center of the board. And after a move like knight to d7, white can play f4, pressuring the pawn. If black trades, for example, white is actually doing very well with this open g file here. A lot of ideas again to hit this king on g8. If black plays f6 in this position, now white can play knight to c4, overloading the pressure of the pawn. If black plays a move like bishop d6 here, white can simply trade and play something like knight to f2, hitting the pawn. If black were to say, I guess, go queen d8, which is another option here, white can simply play queen e2, bring the rook to the center, and with these knights and the bishop pressuring the center, ideas like bishop h3 as well, white has a glorious position and great chances to win. But instead, Levy plays move e5. Now we get knight d7, and here Levy plays move knight c4. Now, in this position, I would have recommended the move f4 for Levy, trying to protect this pawn on e5. It might look a little bit scary because you're worried about something like knight b4 here, hitting the pawn on c2. But after bishop to e4, white should be okay. Instead, we get knight to c4, and now we have knight to b6 being played. And at this point, Levy is already substantially worse because he has completely misunderstood the concept behind putting this knight on h3. Very specifically, what Levy has misunderstood here is that now the file is open. The bishop hits the pawn on his open diagonals here. There's nothing in the way, and this knight is very, very slow to get into the game. So we get the move queen to e2. We got knight to d4. Levy plays queen g4. This is simply a bad move here. What I think occurred for Levy is he didn't want to trade the bishop for the knight, because even if he wasn't sure if this is much worse, he probably figured black has two bishops, open diagonal, open file, bad knight on h3. How can this be any good? So he goes queen g4. Now we get knight takes knight, and here Levy plays move bishop takes knight on d4. Very logical move. Of course, you don't want to take the knight on c4 because black takes the pawn, and you feel pretty stupid. So we get the move bishop takes knight. Now we get the move pawn to h5 here, and Levy decides to play queen takes h5. Now it's still within the realm of being kind of defendable after queen to d1, but after knight to a3, you're going to have to give up a pawn here on c2. And frankly, from a general human standpoint, unless you want to burn 3 or 4 minutes trying to understand that this isn't the end of the world, it's very hard to play this position. Additionally, Levy is also a player who likes to play tactical type of positions. He doesn't want to play positional grinds. We already saw him get completely outplayed by Julien in the first classical game, where Levy was trying to play a very aggressive attack, and it completely fizzled out. So we get queen takes pawn. Now we get queen takes bishop, Levy takes knight, and after the move bishop takes c2, we've now reached a pretty stable middle game position. But unfortunately for Levy, black has two bishops here. There's no real attack on the king side here. All the squares are covered, and you also have these weak pawns on c4 and e5. So it's looking very, very dire for Levy. But much like in the classical portion, one thing that I said in my recap is that if Levy can keep these games going, keep them complicated just enough, I think he's going to have great chances if he can get Julien low on time. So now we get bishop takes pawn on b7, rook b8 is played, and Levy plays move bishop to f3. Here we get the move rook to b2, and now Levy plays the move rook ac1. So after we get the move rook ac1, here we get rook takes a2, and all roads look like they're leading to a victory for Julien Song. Not only does black have an extra pawn on the queen side, which black can push, white again has no real attack on the king side. So here we get the move rook to e1. Now Julien plays move bishop to g6, and here Levy plays move queen g4, and in this position we inexplicably get this move bishop to c5. Now it's very weird, and I'm going to be honest, as a super grandmaster looking at this game, it's very easy to be critical, but one thing that it seems to me that Julien Song is really missing at critical moments is he's not thinking beyond pure calculation. Now there's something that a lot of players do at the lower levels, which is they simply struggle to think with their brains logically versus trying to calculate endless sequences of moves. Now, when you think about a couple of things, first of all, Levy is a very good blitz player. Secondarily, the position that black has an extra pawn on the board, it's a situation where you should simply trade off the queens, play a5, push the p here, and after knight f4 and bishop to h7, black is simply doing great. Black, in fact, is completely winning in this position, primarily because of the passed pawn and the ability to move this dark square bishop to c5. So bishop c5 is not a terrible move, but it's a move that I'm not a huge fan of from a practical sense, because even though it's winning, it gives white the opportunity to play this move bishop to e4. Now, anybody watching this recap is probably like, well, the evaluation bar says these moves are great. Black is winning. Remember that the perfect play that the computer assumes is with the players being 3,500, or frankly, super grandmasters are better. This is not a level the players can play at this level. They're only 2,300. They can't play at the super GM level. So when I saw this move during the game, I actually thought that Levy might be able to win this game. Now you're probably thinking, why could Levy win this game? There are two reasons. Julien has been terrible, low on time. Secondarily, even though black is winning, if white is ever able to trade off the bishops and have this knight that can start jumping, say a5, knight g5, rook h4 ideas, there all of a sudden is a lot of counterplay in this position. So here we got the move queen to d2. This isn't the best move. It's still fine. Nothing wrong with it. We got the move rook to f1. And now we get the trade and the move queen to d4. Now, I really like Julien's abilities to sort of step back and play queen d4 here, understanding that if queens come off the board, he should be doing very, very well with this outside juicer on the a file. So we get queen to f3 from Levy. This is a move that I don't really want to be critical of it because it's a blitz game, but knight g5 would have probably been slightly better. And after takes bishop d4 and rook to d1 here. After c5 and rook d2, black is better, but it's not yet completely gone. But Levy at this point, I'm sure, assumed that he was lost no matter what. So from a practical standpoint, he plays queen f3, trying to keep more pieces on the board. So we got queen takes pawn on e5. Levy plays rook e1. We get queen to f5 here. This is an excellent move, as it now more or less forces white to trade the queens off. We get rook to e5, bishop d4, rook takes f5, and now we get to move pawn to g6. So we get to move g6, and this is a terrible decision from Julien Song here. In this position, when I look at the game, if you see this position, material is even here, but once again, black has this outside pass pawn. G6 is simply a ridiculous move to play here. It shows sort of panic, I guess, or nerves or shock about the situation here, because a5 is the obvious move that should be played 100 times out of 100. You've got the pawn, you've got the bishop, you've got the rook. You've got to push your p in this position. Now, the reason that I'm so critical of this decision by Julien Song is because if white ever plays rook d5 and you go c5, it's going to be somewhat similar to the game. But what happens here is that after the move c5 is played, white will have to play knight g5, black just goes a4, knight to f3, bishop f6, takes, and after rook to a8 here, there's no way really to stop this black pawn from getting up the board. So this is completely winning. But when Julien Song plays g6, he gets something similar, but now what you'll notice is the knight is coming to f3 a lot quicker to hit the bishop. There's rook to d7, pressuring the pawn, and now it's not so obvious to convert. So you get the move rook c2, and this is just a terrible move from Julien. Again, a5 is required in this position. After knight to e4, white is not losing any longer, but after rook to c8, knight d6 has to be found, rook to a8, knight b5. All these moves are going to have to be found by Levy, and frankly, I still think there would be a very, very high chance that he would lose this game. But instead, we got the move rook c2 from Julien Song. Now Levy goes rook d7. We get rook to a8. But now after knight takes f7, we've reached a position where even though white is up a pawn, again, black can push the pawn and should still be fine. But there was no reason to reach this in the first place. If you play a5, a4 right away with rook a8, there's just no reason to help white get the pieces to better squares. But this also shows how good of a player Levy is in these situations with low time on the clock, but also how Julien Song's instincts when he has to make these moves with 5-10 seconds per move, his instincts are not very good, and Levy is clearly better at moving with no time on the clock. So we get knight to h6, king to h8, Levy plays knight g4, and now Julien plays the move rook to f8. Now this is a move which just loses the game on the spot. There's no reason to play this. a4 is the obvious move here. Frankly, with 17 seconds on the clock, I think that Julien Song should have spent his time and played this move. But as I've mentioned in my previous recaps, it's very clear to me that Julien is afraid of any and every tactic that Levy has in a given position, and he just assumes that there's going to be some reason that he's lost. So the reason that Julien Song didn't play a4 is because after this move rook to e1, he probably saw a3, rook e7, figured double stack, I'm getting checkmated. But after a2, white actually has no way to checkmate. After check and king g8 here, you can't go to f6 because I take the knight. You go to h6, I go here, and there's simply no way to checkmate the black king. The king is completely stable, and if white doesn't play check here, say white goes knight h6 trying to mate, you simply queen, and here white's king is going to get checkmated before the black king gets mated by the rook on h7. So a4 is the only move here to sort of save the game. We get the move rook to f8, and now Levy plays move rook to a7. This move is not the best move. Rook to b1 with rook b7 will be winning, but rook a7 is a very understandable move because with limited time on the clock, you're going to win this pawn on a5, and now in this position, white simply has one extra pawn on the king side, and most importantly, with it being a bishop versus a knight and this weak king on h8, I already knew that Levy would go on to win the game. So you get rook c2, rook a7, c4, c3, rook d2, king h3, and now we get the move bishop takes f2. Now here c2 would have been a better try because it would have led immediately to an endgame with rook and knight versus rook and bishop, but instead we get bishop f2, nothing wrong with this, rook takes c3, and now we get the strange move bishop c5. Now rook to f5 here, threatening rook h5 to hit the king, would have forced pretty much an instant trade, I think, of the knight for the bishop, and this endgame with 2v1 and the king on h8 should be an easy draw. Instead, we get bishop c5. Levy trades, goes knight e5, we get the check, and now we reach this endgame. Now, even though this endgame is technically a draw with a 2v1, it's very logical to go for this from the white side because the black king is cut off by this one file. So if white can ever get something, let me just set it up, something like this, for example, with this position, white is completely winning in this position, primarily because this king can never cross to the f file. So I really like this decision from Levy, even though technically this is a draw, because for someone who's 2300, you see this position and you immediately start to panic. So we get king e6, Levy goes back, we get king e5, and now Levy plays move king to g4. Now in this position, probably what I would recommend here from the black side is to play this move rook to d4, and the main reason is that you cut the white king from coming up to the 4th rank, and after g4 you can play this move g5, and after white plays rook f5 you have the very important move rook d3 check, followed by rook to rook to d2 check, and basically you just start checking this king forever on this g file, and this will be a draw. Instead, we get this king g4 takes king g5, and now Julien Song is in an impossible situation where there's, in my opinion, 0.00% chance he finds the one drawing move here. But for anybody who's a strong player and is curious about this position, the drawing move in this position is rook to h3, pinning this pawn, and after takes you go king e4, and here you simply play this move rook to h8, and this is actually a theoretical draw because if white goes king g7 you can simply move this rook to d8. If white plays rook a5 trying to cut the king here, now you can simply play, I believe, king to f3 is a draw here, and now you put the king on g4. If white goes rook g5 you have the simple move rook to d4 here, and then rook to g4, forcing a trade of all the pieces. So rook to h3 is a forced draw, but honestly I think that it's a very tough move. I'm not even sure that I would find this necessarily if I had 2 seconds on the clock, but it is still a very important concept. Instead, we got the move king to e4, Levy goes rook f4, we get king e3, g4, and after this move rook to f6, we've now reached a winning rook and pawn endgame, primarily because the black king is cut off by the rank here. There are 2 ways to win. One way is cutting the king off by this file, or by the rank. The other way to win is to get this one where you cut the king off this way. So if you can cut the king off this way, or if you can cut the king off, let me go back to the game, you can cut the king off where the king can't go back to stop the pawn. Both of these rook and pawn endgames are forced wins. So we get rook g1, ultimately Levy starts escorting his pawn up the board, eventually you get this position, and now Levy moves the king up. Black will have to sack the rook for the pawn, so therefore Julien decides to resign the game in this position, and Levy wins the first rapid game. So a very topsy-turvy game, many mistakes by both sides, but it's clear once again that Julien Song, his technical understanding is very strong, but once they reach these positions where it's all about tactics at the very end with limited time, his instincts aren't as good, and Levy is actually getting a bit lucky and just surviving. So if Levy can survive to the end of these games, it's clear that Levy has great chances to win this match. All right, so Levy wins the first rapid game. So let's move to the second rapid game where Levy has the black pieces. So we get d4, Levy plays knight f6, and now we get this move a6, and here we get the move d5. Now this is what is known as the Queen's Gambit decline, the Janowski variation. Many of these systems Levy has played before. Usually he plays it out of this move order, but he has played this, so it shouldn't come as a surprise. So we get the move c5. Levy plays knight c6, bishop f4, knight h5, bishop d2, and now we get the move b6. Here Julien Song trades the pawns, plays bishop g5, and we reach this position that is a little bit better for white due to the stone wall structure. We got bishop g2, knight b5, and now we get the move bishop to d7. Now after we get the move bishop to d7, Julien plays knight to e1 here, and Levy plays move knight to f6. Now you're probably thinking, isn't the pawn hanging on d4? Well, if black were to play the move knight takes d4, this actually is completely lost, because after bishop to e3, white simply targets the knight on c6 here, and if black plays e5, you can take this pawn, and it's disaster as you'll lose the rook. And if you go knight c6 back, white can now play the move knight takes d5, sacking a knight. If black takes, white gobbles, just a complete disaster. All of your pieces in the center of the board are hanging, and you're going to lose the game. So that's why Levy goes knight to f6 back, over protecting this pawn on d5 from any sacks. We get bishop g5, rook c8, and now we get the move e3. Levy plays h6, we get the trade, and now the move knight d3. Now, much like the first game, Levy has gotten completely outplayed from a positional standpoint. This knight on d3 has great squares to jump to. You can even move this knight to e2 down the road and try to go for some kind of double stack, like let's say, just to illustrate the point, something like this, followed by rook c1. And white just has all the play because of this great knight. Additionally, in this position, black has this bum light square bishop on d7 here, which is simply not a good bishop in this position. It has no scope. It's walled in by the pawn, by the knight, everything here. So therefore, black is simply in trouble. So we get the move knight to b4. Julien plays knight e1. Now we get g5. I'm not sure if we would have gotten a repetition with knight c6, knight d3, but Levy decides to play g5. We get f4, and Levy takes the pawn on f4. Now we get e takes f4, Levy plays knight c6, knight to f3, we got bishop c7, and here we got the move knight e5. Levy trades the knights, plays queen to g5, and now we get the move rook to f4. Now this move is a slight mistake here. This square would be better occupied by the knight with knight to e2 down the road, just to set up a point. If you get this knight to f4, the knight is permanently pressuring these pawns, whereas with the knight on c3 here, it's spying these pawns on d5 and b5, but both of these pawns are simply guards. If you take, you lose the pony. You take, you lose the pony. But if you can rotate this pony to f4, now the knight pressures these pawns, and white actually has a very serious advantage. But we get rook to f4, also reasonable move, simply guarding the pawn. Maybe you have rook to h4 as well. Now we get bishop b6, a3, rook c4, and here we get the move knight to e2, over protecting the pawn on d4. Levy plays rook c8, we get the trade, and now we get the move b3. Levy goes rook c8, we get bishop to f3, and at this point the computer says it's about equal, but it's a very topsy-turvy situation because black has pressure on d4, you've got the rook on the open file, and it's mostly a question of whether white can open up the king side. So we get queen to e7. Now Julien plays b4, g4 would have been better, but we get b4, rook c4, and now we get the move g4, trying to open up this g file. Now at this point, Levy is in severe trouble because the rook, even though it looks beautiful on c4, is doing nothing. There's no c1 square. The pawns on b4 and d4 are both guarded here. So this rook is simply on the wrong side, and now this king is completely naked and out in the open, and white should be winning. So Levy goes queen g5, we get king to h1, king h8, we get takes, and now after bishop takes d5, Levy is down a pawn, white has two connected central pawns, and white should be winning the game. So we get rook c3. Here Julien decides to take. This is a move that I'm not a big fan of in this situation. Rook to f2 and rook to g2 should just be winning on the spot, but we get takes, and now they move queen to g1. Levy goes queen g5. Important not to blunder the clean checkmate on g8 with queen to g8. So we get queen g5. Here we get knight to e2, trying to guard the pawn, and now Levy plays f4. We got bishop f3, queen to f5, trying to move this queen to either d3 or c2. We get queen c1, king g7, queen c3, and Levy checks and plays the move queen g6. We get king f2, queen g5, king to e1, and now we get to move queen h4. Now in this position, queen to f5 would actually be close to drawing, because if white tries to run this king to the queen side, there's queen to b1 check, and now there's bishop f5 or queen to a2 followed by queen b1, and the white king has to find a different safety square. But after we get this move queen to g5, now the king can run because the queen on g5 has no access to this diagonal. We got queen h4, queen to f2, and now we get the move queen d3. Here Levy plays bishop to e6, and this move actually loses on the spot. Now after the move bishop to e8, trying to go to this other diagonal, this is still apparently fine for black. We get bishop to e6, and now we get the move queen e4. Now here bishop to h5 would actually win the game on the spot, because there's this huge threat of queen g6. If black goes queen g2 to cover the square, white can go queen to f3 here, and if you move the queen, say take on h2, there's queen b7 check, hitting the king, collecting the bishop, and you lose the game. And if you trade in this position, now after a couple moves like say bishop c4 and king c3, you're going to lose the pawn on f4, or you're going to reach an endgame where the two connected pass pawns simply are winning for white. Eventually white will be able to push the piece forward, and this is an easy win. But we get queen e4. Now we have queen takes pawn, and here we get to move pawn to d5, and this is just unacceptable. In this position, Julien Song should see queen to b7. You hit the king, you win the bishop. This is just game over on the spot. There are no ifs, ands, or buts. Instead, we get d5, Levy checks. Here we get king c2, and now we get to move bishop to f7. Now this is actually very tricky here, because there's only one winning move for white, and it's actually not the move that you would expect. The winning move for white here is this beautiful move pawn to e6, sacking the queen, and here you can simply go e7 and d6, and with the bishop having access to both c6 and h5, black is actually completely lost. Now a sample line would be queen to f2. For example, queen to f2, there's check and white queens. If you go queen h4, now white can go bishop c6, queening the pawn. And if you play a delayed move like a5 here, white can simply move the king up to d3 here. And the point is that the bishop is still coming to c6 in this position, and you're going to lose the game. So it's basically a Zugzwang. Black goes h5, king d3, you have bishop c6 with the queen, and it's winning. Is this easy to find? Absolutely not, but it still is very beautiful. Instead, Julien Song plays king b3, and now Levy goes bishop g6. The white queen gets trapped, and now you sadly have to resign the game. So what are our takeaways from this game? Much like the first game, Levy was completely outplayed, but when we get into this final phase where the players have to play with seconds left on the clock, it's very clear that Julien Song simply doesn't have the nerves, and he folds like a cheap suit. So Levy gets another miracle. So he's now won both the both of these first two rapid games, things are looking very groovy. So let's get to the third game. So in the third game, Levy now has the white pieces and he opens with the move e4. We got e6 and Levy plays the move b3. We got d5 and the move bishop b2. Now we get knight to f6, Levy goes e5, and here we get the move knight to g8. Now after bishop b2, black can potentially take this pawn on e4, but after knight c3, knight to f6, and queen to e2, followed by this queenside castle, white actually is doing quite well, and this is a very, very dangerous position to play. So we get knight to g8, Levy plays d4, we get c5, takes, and now the move bishop d3, we get knight c6, and Levy plays knight f3. Julien goes knight e7, Levy plays a3 here, trying to stop knight b4 from hitting this bishop, which is on a really, really nice diagonal. We get to move a5, Levy plays queen e2, and now we get to move knight g6. We get g3, castles, and Levy plays move h4. Now, for the first time in this entire match, in the first 5 games, Levy has actually gotten a good position out of the opening, and white is significantly better. He's got the great bishops on the diagonals, he's threatening to attack on the king side here, and black's position is in black is struggling in this position. So we get f6 here. Levy takes, and now we get to move g takes f6. And now with both the diagonals open, this king on this open g file, white should be doing very well. So we get knight to c3 here from Levy. We get knight to e7, and now Levy sacks the bishop for the pawn. Now this is simply a terrible decision from Levy. There are many ways to be winning here. Apparently white should play knight to g5 to break through, or knight to a4 first, and this is good. Knight g5 actually is a very cool line, because after pawn takes knight, when you take here, now after takes, and king g8, it looks like black is okay with the king running out. But after queen to h5 here and the threat of queen h7, if black goes rook f7, it's checkmate in uno. If you take, white simply slides the king, and this mate is pretty much unstoppable in the position. Maybe you can go rook to f5 here to try and stop, but after queen h8 here, check, there's again going to be a checkmate. Maybe there's rook f3 as well, but I think after rook f3 it's the same problem, right? You go check here, and now you go check, king to f5, and now after rook to f7, if here it's mate, if here it's going to be a mate again after rook to g7 and the double checkmate. So white is going to win the game. So this would be winning. Now Levy here plays bishop h7 after a 90-second think, and I think in my opinion this is a very bad decision. Not so much the move itself, but the time usage here from Levy. This is a situation where with 9 minutes and 49 seconds, you should probably spend 2 or 3 minutes here. Instinctively you feel like you should be winning. So much time on the clock, you should probably spend 2 or 3 minutes before making a decision. If Levy had used that amount of time before playing bishop takes h7, I would have no problem with this move. It would be completely fine. But playing this move after 90 seconds in such a committal situation is just a bad decision. So we get takes, Levy plays check, and now after the move king to h6, there simply is no way to hit this black king. The king is safe on h6, and for a third game in a row, Julien Song has now achieved a winning position. So Levy decides to play knight takes e6. We get takes, and here we get the move knight d4. Levy checks, we get king g7, and Levy plays move queen d3. We get knight c6, Levy castles, and here we get the move knight to e5, queen to f1, and Julien plays move rook c8. Now, I would argue that of the 3 positions that Julien Song has been winning in this rapid portion, this position to me is probably the one that I'd be most worried about, simply because the king is open, white's trying to open up the center of the board, and it feels like there should be some tactics. So Levy goes knight to a4 here. Now we get to move queen c7. This is an excellent decision, ganging up, trying to create the checkmate with a double stack on the c file. We get king to b1, and now Julien plays move knight takes c2. Now this of course is a mistake here. Bishop takes a3 would simply win the game on the spot, because after takes, king a1, black can take the pawn, hitting the knight. If you move the knight, suddenly there's a checkmate on a2 and b2 as well. There's no way to stop it, and you resign. But instead we get knight c2. Levy goes king takes knight. This loses on the spot. If white goes queen to e2, oddly enough, after knight takes a3 and king to a2, this is going to be a big fight here because the knight is on the rim. The king actually is very safe now on the edge, and after bishop d6 and f4, suddenly there are all kinds of threats every which way. And honestly, I think if this position had occurred in the game, I think that Levy probably would have found a way to win. Instead, Levy takes the knight. We get bishop takes. Now we get queen c2, king a2, bishop takes bishop, Levy takes, and after this move a4, black is simply crashing through here. You're going to open up the a file. There's a c4 square. The rook is infiltrating on the c file. There's just no hope to survive. So Levy takes, we get rook to c4, Levy goes king a1, and after rook takes a4, Levy resigns this game because after knight takes rook, Black can take, make the check. If you go to the A file, there's going to be a checkmate. If you go to C file, rook C8 is also checkmate, as the king has no escape squares. So Levy ends up losing this game. He loses in the third game of the match. This means now that Levy is only up by 1 game. So now we are going to take a look at the final game. Give me 1 second because I have to pull this up. Just give me 1 second, you guys. We have to make the sausage as we get going on the fly. 1 second. Here we go, and I will do this right now. So as we move into the fourth game, Levy is down by Levy is up by 1 point. Let me adjust this so you guys get all the information. Song Julien 2284. There we go. Levy is going to this third and final game simply up by a score of 2-1 in the rapid. Now it's been very topsy-turvy, but if Levy can simply solidify at this point, he should take the lead heading into the blitz day of chess. So here we go. This is the fourth and final game of the day, and Julien Song plays d4. Levy plays d5, and he goes back to the classic Queen's Gambit accepted. We get the same line with bishop g4, e6, and now Levy plays bishop e7. We get h3, bishop h5, and the move knight c3. Now again, much like on the first day, Levy continues to play this dubious Queen's Gambit accepted with bishop g4, but he changes it very slightly, with the wrinkle being that instead of putting the bishop on d6, he puts the bishop on e7. We get castles, rook to e1, and now we get to move c5. Now this already is quite different, because if Levy had put the bishop on d6, say you get this position, for example, with castles in this position and rook to e1 is played, c5 here I believe is still kind of okay, but I think after d5, white might be a little bit better. So we get this position. Here Julien plays g4, and this is actually one of the funny things about chess. Remember how on the first day when I was talking about classical, the way to take advantage of the bishop being on d6 was to be very aggressive with g4 and e4. I don't know if Julien Song saw my recap or someone told him that with the bishop on d6 you should play g4, but now because the bishop is on e7 versus the bishop being on d6 and black playing knight c6, this is actually a mistake. Now, this is why chess is so hard and why you can't memorize things and simply get to a very high level off of memorization alone. Because if you try to do that, you end up in a situation like this, where one thing, this h3, g4 would have been good with the bishop on d6, but the bishop being on e7 means that this is simply not correct. So we get bishop g6. Julien plays knight to e5. Levy plays knight c6. We get the trade. And now we get the move pawn takes pawn. Levy trades the queens, and this is actually something I really dislike here from Levy in this position. Knight to d7 to me looked like a very logical move. The reasoning being that when you trade the queens, you've reached an endgame where white has the 2 bishops, and even though white has pushed the pawns forward on the king side without any queens on the board, white is completely fine. In fact, white is a little bit better. So Levy takes on c5. We get g5, knight h7, knight e4, bishop e7, and now we get to move h4. And at this point, Levy is in for a world of hurt, as he has this terrible knight on h7 with these double stacked pawns. The king side is essentially frozen. Black can never try to chip at the structure because his bishop will always gobble the pawn. So the double pawns and inability to break the structure here due to this great light square bishop, Levy should be losing the game. So we get rook d8, bishop d2, knight f8, f4 is played, Levy goes knight d7, and now we get to move king f2. Levy plays knight b6, bishop b3, and here we get to move knight to b4, and now we have the move bishop takes b4. Now this move is actually not a terrible decision in terms of what Julien Song is aiming for. Computer would prefer that white keeps the 2 b's on the board, but understandably at the 2300 level, you're looking for very concrete plans, and Julien has a very concrete idea in mind when he trades, which is to temporarily sack a pawn with h5 here and go g6, ruining the black pawn structure. So Levy takes the pawn. We get knight g5 here. This is simply a mistake. If bishop takes e6 had been played and king f8 occurred after rook to g1, winning the g pawn followed by a double stack, as you guys can tell from the valuation bar, this is just completely winning for white. But Julien instead plays knight to g5. Now Levy can trade, and after the move king to f8, again it's completely winning. Bishop to e7 here, knight takes e6, and king to h7, and white would be better, but it's not GG on the spot. Having said that, from the black perspective, I understand not wanting to go into this because you're worried about bishop c2 and rook g1 and everything collapsing on the king side. So we get king f8. Julien plays a3, Levy plays bishop a5, and now we get the move bishop takes e6, threatening b4, trapping the bishop on the rim. Levy plays move knight to a4, and now we get to move rook to d7, and with the classic kebab on the 7th rank, this should be game over on the spot. Levy plays knight c5, we get knight to h7 check, king e8, and rook takes g7 here. Levy plays bishop to d8, not knight takes bishop, because after rook to g8, white would simply gobble the rook and then bring the knight back, and this is a completely winning endgame. So we get bishop d8. Now Julien plays bishop to f7, we get king d7, and the move bishop takes g6. Now while white is winning here with the 2 extra pawns, I actually objectively don't like this decision, because in this position you could simply retreat with the bishop to c4, and this king is completely stuck. And I think this idea of simply knight to f6 here followed by rook to g8 winning the rook is pretty much unstoppable. Let me see what the computer says. I think it says bishop to h4, king to e2, and you can try rook to d8 here, but after b4, knight d7, apparently bishop d3 wins, but even rook takes g6 or bishop b5 are probably also good enough. Nonetheless, Julien goes for this concrete plan with the 2 extra pawns. We get knight d3. Here we get knight b2, takes, and the move bishop to b6. Julien Song plays knight f6. Levy goes knight c4. And now we get to move rook to d7, king to e6. And here we get to move bishop to f7. Levy takes, we get bishop takes knight, and Levy plays the move rook to c8. Now in this position, Julien Song inexplicably plays this move king to d3. This move is still a winning move here, but this is a move that I absolutely hate in this position, because it's clear that for probably the 5th time in this match, Julien Song again sees the boogeyman and completely freaks out. If you play the move bishop to a6, for example, after rook to c3, you can simply go rook to d3, and after the trade here, this is a winning bishop and pawn endgame because this a pawn is the correct color. It's the same color as the bishop, so white can simply push the p up the board, and this is an easy win. So this is an easy technical win, but instead Julien plays king d3, and now we get bishop takes e3, and both bishops are hanging. Now while white is winning in this position, it is a little bit tricky, as we're about to see. So here we get to move rook to d6 here. This is actually the moment where there's one last clean victory. You can go check, check, and bishop to e6 here, hitting the rook, pawn guards the bishop, both pieces under attack, and here black just loses the game on the spot. Instead, we get check, king g7, we got check, king f6, and now again, Julien Song misses the winning line with rook f7 and f5. Instead, he takes, we get rook takes a7, and now Levy plays king f5. Now, while this is a winning rook and pawn endgame with white having 2 extra pawns, there are some technical issues here because this is an edge pawn, which means that if the black king can ever get back, none of the standard setups, for example, just to set up a point, you know, if you get a position like this endgame is a draw, even though the king is super far away, because this is an edge pawn. Basically, the reason this is a draw is that whenever, or I should say king c2, the reason this is a draw is black can always play rook d8 trading, or even just check the king forever here, and there's really no way for white to make any progress in such a position. Basically, black just waits forever. So there are some technical issues due to it being an edge pawn, but nonetheless, white should still be winning. We got a4, check, king d3, and now Levy plays the move rook to e1. Important that Levy does not take the pawn, because after check and the trade here, the white pawn is simply too fast. It gets up the board before the black king can get back. Additionally, if you take with the king, there's rook f7 check, you go away, you lose the rook, you go here, there's check, win the rook, GG, why not? So Levy goes rook e1. Now we get rook to f7 check. Here we get king to e6, and the move rook to a7, king f5, and here we get a5 being played. Now, while this is still winning with the edge pawn, this is still a tricky endgame to convert. So we get rook to a1. Now we get to move rook to f7, rook to a7, king takes pawn, and here Julien plays move king d4. Levy checks, we get king c5, and here we get to move rook c1, king to b6, and the move king to e5. Now in this position, we get to move rook to d7, and this is the last moment where this is a winning rook and pawn endgame. I actually would say that when I look at this position, going back all the way to this moment, I probably would not have played a4. I think that the move rook to a5 is simply a much better decision, because if black goes back to f6, now you can play a4, and if black goes king g4 here, I believe that in this position you can go check, king h4, and there should be some way to win. I want to say rook g1. I don't know if this is technically win. This might actually be a draw, even though the pawn's going up the board. I guess king e5, king h5 would be a draw, but personally, I would have tried to go for this sort of endgame if I was in the situation versus what he does in the game, because once we get to this position right here, actually, it's very, very tricky to play. Also, I would point out one other note in this position. When we get this position, I probably would also play king to d4 right away, followed by king c5, although it's very similar. So we get this endgame, we get this position, and now in this position, rook to c7 would be the winning move here, because after rook to b1 check, white goes king c6, rook to a1, and here white can tickle the king, and now you can play the move king to b6, and the king is a little bit too far away in this endgame. After check, you can go king to a7 here, king f6, and now you play a6, and the king here is cut off by 1, 2, 3, 4 rows, and this is just a technically winning endgame, because what you do is you go rook c2, king comes over, you go rook c8, rook b8, and now the king simply dilly-dallies its way, it escapes out, and this is a winning position. Note, if you reach this position back here, by the way, if you get this one where the king is cut off by 1 less row, say it's cut off by 3 rows in between here, this is actually a theoretical draw, because when you get to this moment with the pawn on a7 here, actually, by the way, just to point out, here in this position, black would actually not go king 8 because this allows white to build a bridge with rook b6. So black would go rook b3. And this is simply a draw because whenever white tries to get in with rook c8, rook b8, the king is simply too close. You cut the square off. So this one extra square is too much. Whereas from here, when you go rook c2, the king can't get to the square. So you're able to play rook c8. So we get rook d7. Levy plays king e6, we get rook to d2, we got check, king a7, and now after the move rook to b3 here, this is simply a draw. We get king e7, rook d4, rook b5, and Levy correctly understands that in this position with the pawn on a7 and it only being 3 rows between, there's no way for white to win. They play a lot more moves. Eventually this game will end in a draw. We get rook b7, sacking the rook by Julien Song. Not the only move, many ways to make a draw, but the game ends peacefully. Now this is another game, so if we look at this objectively from a match standpoint, yes, Levy is leading the match by 1 game, but the problem with this is that if we're being honest from a chess perspective, Levy has been getting outplayed in 5 of the 6 games so far. He was losing in all 4 of the rapid games. He was losing in the first classical game. The second classical game is the only game in this match where Levy has not had a losing position. So from a content side or results side, Levy is doing just fine. But remember, if Levy is serious about trying to become a stronger player and get to Grandmaster, for example, this quality of play would not be good enough. If he were playing against someone who is 2,500, he would have lost 5 of the games in this match so far. So even though Levy's leading, I'm not super enthused by his play. I suspect the blitz is going to be even better for him than the classical or the rapid, but it's kind of a little bit meh for me on a personal level, just because I want to see Levy playing good chess, and I don't really think he's playing up to the level that he's capable of. So Levy leads the match after the 4 rapid games. The play has been pretty shaky across the board, but you know, it is what it is. So that's going to do it for our recap of today's rapid portion of this creator clash between the international masters Julien Song and Levy Rozman. If you are not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we'll be back very soon with some more great quality content. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you very soon. Have a good one. Bye.